right. Welcome, Lexi. I'm so pleased to have you as my guest today on the podcast. For those of you who don't know Lexi Kasson is a brilliant data scientist and works in data ethics for Databricks and has some really interesting ideas on data AI and where that actually is going to go in the world. And so I'm very pleased to have you as my guest today. Thank you, Lexi.
Thanks so much, Morgan. I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you. So let's jump right in. I think we warmed up a
Okay.
little bit in our hi, how are you conversation, but let's talk about generative AI and talk about there are some risks out there and things that people are very concerned about that I think are important for people to be aware of. You and I are both in the camp of read every privacy policy, dive deep into every single,
More or less.
attachment, et cetera. We're one of seven people on the planet who does two of seven people who do it. But really, it's very important and there are a lot of implications. Um, this weekend, I did see a post from Cassie Koskarov that she shared somebody else's post on DeepSeek that essentially said DeepSeek is claiming IP for anything that you use it for, even asking DeepSeek itself, if we generate code, does it belong to us or is it your IP? And DeepSeek's response being something along the lines of, you would have to have a licensing agreement with us to be able to utilize the code that we generated. And I think that goes directly against the idea of why we would utilize an AI in the first place. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. I know that you're very deep into that side of things.
Yes, it's something that I certainly look at. The challenge that I see with DeepSeek is, of course, it came out of a different licensing structure than most of the other open source models that are out there today. So when you look at the Llama models, for example, and their open source licensing, it's a very different structure. And those typically in any of the open source that you see in kind of the Western world, the types of licensing you get, whether it's through Apache or through Linux Foundation or what have you, have a certain structure around whether you can use it for commercial use, whether you can use it for academic use, whether you can use it for personal use, and various constraints around this. Obviously, DeepSeek took a very different approach, which was that none of it's yours. You don't get to use it for anything without our say-so. And of course, as you mentioned, very few people read the full terms and conditions of what we agree to. And frankly, I'm guilty of it too. I will take myself out of the two people who read all of the EULAs. I don't. I scan for the word soul, and if it's not there, I kind of assume everything's fine. That said, it's not always fine. And the requirements around what data is going in and what information you can and cannot use and what you can and cannot use it for is really becoming a much more pressing matter for people, especially those who maybe aren't in this industry. I think it's something we know because we've been doing this long enough and we've been working with models like this. Well, not like DeepSeek, but like other types of models, other types of software applications that have a licensing structure that has to do with this, where we at least kind of know what we're looking for, or we hand it to the lovely lawyers we work with and say, hey, could you please read this and tell me if I'm going to get into any hot water for using this? And then they tell us, which is great, assuming we have access to a lawyer. Where we're at now, though, is the masses, like everybody else who's not accustomed to this type of licensing structure and software supply chain and all this good stuff, are using AI, and they're using whatever seems to be the biggest, hottest, bestest AI, including DeepSeek, and not recognizing this potential problem. And so, particularly looking at things like people have a business idea, as an example, who want to start something new and they want to kind of validate this idea that they might have. If it's a commercial application, it's not just DeepSeek that might have problems with that. If you then use it commercially, that has a different implication for licensing structures on other models. So I do think we're getting into a point where more people, more of the general populace is going to run afoul of some of these licensing agreements in ways that they're maybe not aware of yet.
Excellent point. I think most people don't know. I actually was just talking to my husband at lunch and I asked him about it. He's like, I really want AI. And so NVIDIA is
I got a new leather jacket.
like a great leather jacket at CES last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. Jensen Huang announced that there would be personal AI that you can buy and have in your own home, and that it's going to be this small little box. My husband's like, "Well, we're buying one of those. We're going to buy one of those," because he's totally a techie like we are and thinks that that's like super cool. I said, "Great. Do you know what to do with it?" He said, "No." I said, "Well," he said, "what I love about it is that it's captive. It doesn't need to be on the internet to work, and we can put our, I have a GPT that I call Morgan's Brain that's got a lot of my IP in it. It's got my books and my articles I've written and podcasts I've been on, and all sorts of things, and even HBR articles that I've contributed to. They're all in there, but I just have it for me. I don't have it publicly available, but I ask it questions all the time because I know, like, I know we talked about that at some point. He has the same kind of thing on a different topic area. He said, "Wouldn't it be great if we could just like do like the Notebook LM thing with that Google has and do ourselves and have ourselves having a conversation?" So, well,
Mhm.
it's a great idea, but there's going to be a programming language required in there at some point. And I don't know if we know exactly what that means. He announced that there would be a laptop as well. So we're actually talking about now, we've got these products that we use today that have licensing agreements that we don't necessarily understand if we're using them appropriately or not. And now if we're going to have that AI in our own laptop and it's captive, it doesn't belong to anyone. It's captive as a piece of hardware. It's not captive as a piece of software that has all of the knowledge and the training and all of those other things. So it's going to be I think a really interesting exploration as we move into that, because the commercial aspect of what you're allowed to do with things or not really is going to come into play.
Mm. I think even beyond that, what that starts to make me think about is sort of the way that people portray themselves as an AI in the same way that people portray themselves on social media. What are the ramifications of trying to encode your personality and the way that you speak and the types of things you talk about and so forth? And what would you want encapsulated in that AI? Like, what's going to be helpful for you? And then on the flip side, if this at some point was something that could interact on your behalf, what would you want to be facing the world of what you have and what you would want to encode? To me, it becomes like the kind of public persona question of, am I Instagram ready, or am I, whatever. It's sort of that, but it's the like, is this something I want to show the AI so that I can portray myself in a particular way, so that that is what perpetuates about me, as opposed to all the rest of life, which can be messy. And then you don't really want that encoded and captured forever in an AI.
Yeah, that is a very excellent point. I hadn't really thought about it from that point of view, because I actually I have an interesting persona because I'm the only Morgan Templar in the world. And so everything about Morgan Templar is out there front and center, easy to find. And even the really bad, I don't want to say bad, I'll just say ways that I've come across poorly are out there. And so I think that's going to be an important consideration. We talk about what's possible for a chat bot, and that's really great to be able to interact on your behalf. And it seems like you're talking to a person. Some of us can always tell because we're very used to talking to AIs. But I also think that it's it is an opportunity to think about streamlining some of the things that we do in life. I do a lot of just screening out my email, reading through it, replying to my 15 or 100, depending on the day, LinkedIn messages of, "Can we do coding for you? We've got this great company in India and Ukraine." It's like, that's all great. I don't need any of that right now, but I do like to reply to everybody individually. I don't like to just let things expire. I like to just say no
Mm.
thanks. And I know Copilot says that it can, and a few other things say that they can. I haven't found that that's as true as they say it is.
I think it's a little bit further off at this point, but I mean, not hugely though. It's not like this is 20 years away or even 10 years away. This might be a year or two away, and they could get there. Um, and yes, I agree with you. Having a better email filter or something that it doesn't even need to reply on my behalf, but just filter the email at this point. email is like, the circular file bin of days of old, is like everything goes in there. And no matter how many rules I set up, those hard and fast rules just don't do it. Adaptive rule systems, which is something that, for what it's worth, we've known for ages when it comes to like data quality rule sets and anomaly detection, all this, you need dynamic rules. They don't have dynamic rules in emails. I can't set up a dynamic rule. Like, I don't know, I'm on multiple listservs for, different groups at work, and a lot of them have the same things posted in multiple. So I get it 5 or 6 times because I'm on all these things. Like, can I not just get this once? I don't care which one. Pick one. Just once. Like, simple things like this that an AI could do today. I would love to see in my email. Google, if you're listening.
That's a really good use case, honestly. The idea that you could, because we can do that, like you said, we do it when we're doing like recording a meeting or whatever. We can, it can filter through and identify, here's a summary of everything that you said. And, the transcript is, pages and pages long, but the summary will fit on, on half a screen. You can easily see what you talked about. It can bring those ideas together from different parts of the conversation and put it together. And I agree with you. When you're on those listservs, like, give me the main core message, give me the first one, and then underneath it, right, and also here and here and here and here, and deliver
Yeah.
that to me so that I can, if I want to interact with one or another of those groups, I know it's out there, but I don't have to.
Yeah. And I don't have to see every single person typing back agree. That is a lot of clutter. I would like a declutterer of that. I appreciate that they all agree. I would like to not see it in my email. Um, it's my own personal request. I do think that those kinds of things, like making it easier to create these sorts of filters. Humans are fantastic at filtering out extraneous information. If we didn't, there are tons of studies about, all the things that if you really listen, you can hear at a given time. If you just sit down and take a moment, you might hear, you'll hear maybe somebody talking to you, but you'll also hear an air conditioner going, or, a door shutting outside, or a plane going by overhead, or some birds chirping outside. And none of those things are really pertinent. You're focused on the one person who's talking to you, but you still get that information, and you're really good. Your brain is typically, most people, really good at saying, this is the part of the noise to look at, or to hear, and to count on. This is where to focus. And that, to me, is one of the best applications of AI right now. There's so much noise, right? And AI, of course, is generating more of it. So that's always great. How do you then focus? How do you define what you want to focus on and say, hey, AI, I want like a summary of all the other things, but show me all of this. This is where I need to be. That, to me, would be hugely powerful, right? Think about that for those of us who are very busy at work, or very busy at home, and you're getting emails and you're getting letters and you're getting notifications on your phone and all these different things, for it to just say, you don't see all of those. Here's your summary of things you actually have to care about. And then here are the ones you really need to dig into. I would be so much happier, so much more sane on a daily basis if it could do those types of things. And it can, if we can get it there. But the question is, how do we make those kinds of capabilities available to the masses? Because most folks, unlike us, don't really have the skill set to go in and code these applications to be able to set up that kind of a rule structure and provide sufficient instruction so that it could actually do that. Oh, and also integrate it with all of the applications that we, of course, have read the EULA on 100%, and know exactly where that data is going. But, to be able to pull all that information together and really understand how to synthesize that for us.
I think that might be why people use some of the more common models, like, ChatGPT is really common. Everybody uses it because it's super easy. But even things like Facebook filters and Instagram filters, and ways to interact there, they've taken the complexity out of it. They, yes, you're tied to their decision on what you see and what you don't see, and their algorithms around those things to eliminate a lot of the noise. Unlike, I recently got on TikTok, and I think it's the same kind of parallel thing. I'm like, what? Why am I getting these things in my feed in TikTok? It's so different than what I would get on
Yes.
Instagram or on LinkedIn, and because it looks at your interests as opposed to your social network. And I thought that's interesting because I will sit and watch for hours while guys cut a big giant tree in half so they can make a big table with their chainsaws. I'll watch a 15-part video to watch them cut a tree down. And I don't know why that fascinates me so much, but because it does, I get a lot of interesting videos about things like that, which is not anything to do with what I do in my life, which is why I like it because it's so different. Whereas LinkedIn knows who I am and Instagram knows who I am, and they know this is what interests me and this is what my social network is and my connections and all those things are defined. And so for me, I look at it, I think, I can customize some of it. I can curate that idea. How do you interact with me? I can make sure that those I can curate it. I can decide how I want it to be and put the right information out there so that's how it reacts to me. Most people have no idea about that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then, the challenge that you have, right? And this is we see it kind of in both directions, is the echo chamber, the confirmation bias kind of effect, right? You go on social media and a lot of what you're seeing, because those are your interests or because that's your network and this is what they're posting about, you're going to get the echo chamber, the bubble of what they're talking about. Without necessarily seeing other perspectives or potentially expanding your horizons in different ways that could be interesting to you, that could be compelling for you. But because they know they have a better chance of getting you to click on something or keep your eyeballs peeled to their particular site, or their app for longer on one particular message, they'll keep you there with that one thing. But, it tends to kind of, I don't know, to me, it curbs some of the curiosity of, oh, that kind of looks interesting. I've never watched something about somebody cutting down a tree and turning it into a table. Um, that's really cool, and I want to see how that actually goes. Um, but because that hasn't come up before and I've not watched something before, I wouldn't get shown that. So either the ability to provide instructions saying, show me some weird things, so long as it's not anything in these particular categories that I never want to see. Um, but then how do you make sure that you're not creating your own confirmation bias bubble? Of like, if I were to go out there and look at proactively what kinds of things would I put into the list if I said curate a suite of things for me to watch. It would probably consist mostly of knitting videos. It's my personal thing, or like gaming. You can probably see the games behind me. So it would be a specific set of things that I'm thinking of in that moment. But if you allow it some freedom, then it opens the opportunity for finding new things and being curious and maybe exploring a little bit more in a way that some of their algorithms might not allow.
And I agree. And I think that's why when I first joined TikTok, I haven't been on it very long. It doesn't know me. And so it just shows random things to me, which, some of them are fine and some of them are not. But as soon as I click like on something, well, then I get 10 more of it. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
liked the idea that you didn't know who I was and you just kind of put random things in front of me. And if I like it, I can click in and actually watch it for real. But I never would have found, well, I take it back. I did actually find these guys who cut down trees on YouTube years ago. And I do actually follow them, just because it's fascinating. But I like things like how you grow crystals in certain chemical combinations, and like they just like showed
Mm.
me that, and I'm like, that's so fascinating. I'll sit and I'll just watch the crystal grow. And but that was because it just randomly drops stuff like, what will she like? Well, can I just
Mhm.
keep the you don't know me filter on forever? Because that's what I want to be able to see more things, broaden my horizons, be aware of things that are happening that I would never have thought of before. I probably wouldn't watch knitting videos with you, but I would certainly watch gaming videos with you, and those kinds of things are also, that you get in that, like you said, the echo chamber of how it sees you, instead of, like, I have so many interests and never go online. I'm really careful about keeping my personal life offline. And so it doesn't know very much about me. It doesn't know that what I collect or what I read. It knows a little bit about what I read because Amazon is everywhere. Um, but the
Yeah.
things that are important to me, I don't. you would never know online. And so I would like random. Oh, I want the random filter.
There used to be that. Like, well, I mean, at least there used to be the ability on Facebook to say, show me things in chronological order as opposed to what you think I'm most interested in. Just give me the whole list and I'll filter through. Um, and I think they've slowly made that harder to find.
Yeah.
If not gone entirely. I honestly don't spend a tremendous amount of time on social media these days. Um, the only exception being LinkedIn, because professionally you kind of have to these days. So that's it's a different experience. It's a very different experience. But I think when we come to kind of how AIs could impact that and what it could do to allow for more um, kind of user control around it. I do think that there's kind of two ways. That there are the folks who would be interested in seeing the random stuff, like, oh, what are people posting today? Like, what's hot, versus the folks who say, show me the things I want. This is all I ever want to see, and that's fine if that's what they want to be doing. I'm personally of the opinion that the more curiosity, the better. Like the more we learn and grow as people, the better. Um, it's not everyone's view.
An interesting thing happened, I think, in recently, as when the hurricanes came up Appalachia and just destroyed North Carolina and parts of Georgia and Florida. I look at a lot of those videos. I'm concerned about that. How can I help? Where, who's talking about what's
Mm,
actually happening? And because I've started following those people now, like all the rest of their content's coming to me. And I'm like, I probably
right.
would never ever have clicked on one of their videos if it hadn't been for that, because
Sure.
that's important. I like to know what's happening. I technically live in Appalachia, right on the edge of it, but I do technically live in Appalachia, and I think it's 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 inaccurately skewed my interest filter
Mm,
and my interest algorithm to I'm not really that interested in a lot of that. But I think that happens over time, and hopefully, we can get I'm going to click on more videos of other things I like to watch. But it
yeah.
does kind of put you in an echo chamber. One of the things
Mhm.
we talked about when we were kind of chatting about having you come here is responsible use and the risk of anti-intellectualism. And I would
Mhm.
love to hear your point of view on that.
Yeah, so this comes back to that desire to see people continue to be curious and to learn and to want to learn. So recently, as an example of this, I've been taking Coursera courses because always keep learning, you always be learning something new. And it occurs to me that when you're on Coursera, this is typically done because you want to take a course on something, you want to learn this content. It's typically not the same, at least I don't find it to be the same attitude, or it used to not be the same attitude of the university student whose parents sent them off to university. And so they have to do their schoolwork, but it's really the last thing they want to be doing at that age. Um, so you'd think people are more invested. They want to be learning this particular topic. I had a peer review assignment that I had to do. I wrote my answer, I submitted it. I then had to review several others, and just to check, because the way that the first one came up, it looked like it was formatted very much the way that ChatGPT would format an answer.
Mhm.
So I took the prompt, the literal question that had been asked, and I put it into ChatGPT, and sure enough, it was a copy paste. And then the next one was a partial copy paste. And then the next one was a copy paste. And it irked me. Not because I'm sitting there going, oh, I wrote my answer and everybody else should too, because I did my work, but more so from the perspective of, you chose to take this course. You opted in, you paid for this, presumably. I mean, you might be doing it for free, that's totally fair. But you're choosing to do this. Why would you then take away your critical thinking about the things that you're learning by putting that into ChatGPT, right? It it starts to kind of snowball into again, more of a what is truth? What do we see as the right answer? Well, if ChatGPT says it, and 3 out of the 4 people's assignments that I had to review now say it, does someone eventually say, well, that must be right? How do you counter this ease of answering versus sort of the intention behind learning? If that's, especially in a situation like this, it's not a high school kid who has to do an essay. This is a Coursera course. This is completely optional. How do we get out of that kind of piece of, well, the AI will just do it for me. I never have to think about this again. I never have to ask the hard questions again. It'll just answer it. And then, the other kind of extrapolating from that is what happens when it's so fast at an answer, even if it's an incorrect answer, that we sort of say, oh, well, I guess it's solved. The next big idea that I had, I guess somebody else has done it or looked at it or whatever. How do we continue to stay curious
Yeah.
and continue to grow as humans?
It, it's a difficult, um, I think it's a difficult issue to really break down because it is so easy and they make it so easy. And I fall victim to it because I have my own GPT with my own stuff in it. So it is all stuff I've written before. I don't want to rewrite it. So I want to just be able to pull it out. But I find that instead of just sitting down and typing out the answer or, even dictating the answer, I just go ask because it's easy
Mhm.
and it will give me an answer that I know is in my voice and is my stuff, except that it isn't completely my voice. It is based off of a model trained by OpenAI. And so
Mhm.
because we don't have a full knowledge base so we included the initial, I guess you'd
Sure.
say seed, whatever, of their
Yeah.
database. And so it isn't all my information. It isn't all my point of view. And I tend to even find myself getting lazy with them because it's so easy to do. But at the same time, some of these things are important decisions. If I need to create something like a patent application, I should be writing that. It's my idea, it's my information, it's my stuff. Sure, I can take what I've written and say, make sure the grammar is right, make sure I've got it in the right format, all of that sort of thing, and utilize it in that way. But my intellectual property, my information should be what is in that document. And I think that it's easy to forget that we still have to think and you
Mm.
don't need to.
Well, and the other part to that is, okay, so you wrote something 5, 10 years ago and now it's in there. Is that still your opinion? Has
Mhm.
it not changed at all in that whole time? Right? I look back at things I wrote 3 months ago and go, oh, well, that's out of date. Things are moving so quickly. Of course, we're in the data and AI industry, so it moves fast. But the kinds of points of view that I was putting out a few months ago, I look back at and say, that's actually not where I am right now. I think we're going in this direction, or I think things have shifted a little bit. So what I had said and what I would have then put into an AI is not what I want to perpetuate as the thing I would say now, because I've learned, I've grown, right? I'm thinking about it in the downtime. The AI is not thinking about this in the downtime. It doesn't continue to grow when you don't ask it questions or give it new data, but we do. And so how do we continue to stay on top of that and continue to grow, even if at the end of the day you put that all back into the AI so that, the mundane questions and the small things can be dealt with? How do you provide growth in a model on an ongoing basis like this, even if it's your own personal model? Because you're not the same person you were a few years ago. You're not the same person you were yesterday. How do you progress the model to keep pace with you
It's
without having it record absolutely everything in your life? Because that's a
which
little
I don't
scary.
want.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
worries me a little bit. But I agree with that. I find that even things like in my own book. So I wrote my first book in 2017, and it was published that same year. And I was looking for some information that I was sure was in my book, and I never once said the word data catalog. Not once
Interesting.
in a book about data governance. I'm
And
like,
they did
really?
exist then. For those who might be listening and aren't sure, data catalogs have been around for a long while.
They do exist. I personally was in a company that didn't really have one. And so I had learned to build out data governance in a company that didn't really have a data catalog.
Mhm.
And so it was, we didn't have any kind of a software or anything. All that came after I implemented data governance. And then we bought some of that stuff. And I never once talked about that. And I thought, that seems so strange. It's like, I don't think I go an hour without talking about a catalog or a lineage or, on in my normal day.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I need to rewrite those books. It's just, it's time
Hmm.
to update because things have changed a lot since 2017 and 2018 when I wrote my books, and they're not the same. They're not even accurate anymore. Not that they're bad. They're not enough. And I think that you're right that the growth of what I've learned in the last 7 years has just been amazing and so much more and well beyond anything that I would never pick my own book up because I'm not at that level anymore. It's still a great book for initial practitioners trying to get into the field because it talks about a lot of good things, but not data catalog, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, but it happens all the time. I mean, as my own personal journey, I started out, well, I started out as a business analyst, but eventually I was a statistician. And then somewhere along the line, somebody said, "Oh, so you're a data scientist?" I went, "It's the same job, okay, whatever." And then somewhere along the line, somebody said, "Oh, so you do machine learning?" I went, "It's still the same job, okay. You throw more skills at it, it's still the same job." And I'm sure this will be controversial. That's fine. And then, of course, along the way, they say, "Oh, so you do AI?" And I kind of went, "I do a part of AI, but sure." Like, you're just renaming it. But over the course of time, right? Even if it's the same thing, that progression, right? What is considered current? How do you showcase that? And then what are those nuances? Like, oh, well, when it went from being statistician to being a data scientist, what was the extra expectation? Then when it became machine learning, what was the extra expectation? And now if you say AI, they just assume you do magic. Which for what it's worth, I don't. I do strategy. Let's just get that out of the way. I don't do magic. Um, I don't even do Magic the Gathering. It's not on those shelves. So there you go.
Well, it's a difficult thing to think about, um, how much you grow because even as you are
Mhm.
describing that, I'm remembering 15 minutes ago when we're talking about you taking classes on Coursera and you're
Mhm.
continuing to up your skills and continuous learning.
Yeah.
And that idea of not only did the job description itself change, but you've also changed and you've grown and you've learned new things. So it isn't exactly the same job anymore because the person sitting in the seat is better. And
Yeah.
so and I feel the same way in general. But I do think the skills are greater, and I think the skill expectation is higher. And certainly, as so many of my friends are looking for work and you see these job descriptions come through, they're asking you to know everything in the world, have 15 years of experience, and we're going to pay you like a business analyst because of course you can get all of that from AI, right? You don't need
Yeah.
to be able to do that. This is just what you're going to do. You're going to be able to use AI on it. And I think there's a misunderstanding of the abilities of the human brain and how we actually are teaching people to be critical thinkers and to continue to learn. And then
Yeah.
again, how does that align to the work we do and the way we mature in our roles? Because I think, if I've sat in that same seat for the last 15 years, I am not the same person that I was at all
Mhm.
15 years ago, certainly not even 7 years ago. I've learned so much, and I've had the great opportunity to be part of great communities where it challenges me to have to really stretch my brain to understand what you all are talking about. Like, okay, wait, I'm the data person in the room. You guys are the analytics people. I think I know where you are. Let me just listen really, really, really hard for a minute before I say anything.
Yeah, it's, that kind of continuous learning and critical thinking doesn't go away because of AI, right? If anything, it's increased into importance, and, with respect to how you then leverage that AI and how you break down tasks differently. And it requires a different type of analysis. You talked about a business analyst a moment ago. That was my very, very first job out of school. And as a business analyst, you're breaking down a process into multiple tasks and thinking about how you then structure that. And what is it that's holding something back, or, how can we accelerate and things like that. When you look at business process analysis, it's really dissecting all of that. And when you think about where AI is going with agents in particular, that's exactly what you need to be able to do. Right. So, if you're looking at how do I create an agent that can do this little slice and that little slice, it's kind of, you're kind of building the generalizability that people assume you get from a person, because we are the general intelligence for the most part, because we can do the whole process. Well, each agent is a small slice, but when you put them all together, it's kind of generally intelligent for how to do something. You can do a whole workflow with one AI. It's not one AI, it's a whole bunch of little teeny AIs that happen to come together to do this. But somebody still has to figure out which AIs to put in there. How do you break this down? How do you chunk it up? To say it makes sense that these things go into this AI because they have, certain information that makes sense to be together versus this other information that's maybe separate. And the decision making criteria between them needs to be figured out. So, there's sort of this need still, right, for critical thinking and real deep analysis of process and real deep understanding of how something can get done. Not necessarily the way it happens now, right? Now might be suboptimal, but how could it get done and what actually needs to happen? What are the true functional and non-functional requirements when you want to dig into business analysis to figure out what needs to occur? Because that's what AI then needs to do. It needs to meet those requirements somehow, but someone is still figuring out what those are.
Do you think that we're going to get to a point where that set of agents and thinking about agentic AI is going to be smart enough to infer what those things are going to be, and actually make those decisions for us? I'm familiar with people who say their software does that today. Um, I think that's about an 85% claim. I think about 85% of that is true, and 15% still
Mhm.
needs that human in the loop. But do you think that we're ever going to get to the point where they can decide without us having to intervene?
Um, I think that they could get there. I don't think that's the question. I think it's more a matter of what are you what do you code them to optimize for, right? And how much autonomy do you give them to do integrations on their own? Because a lot of the things that we look at and say, well, I want the AI to be able to do this whole big workflow. Well, that workflow currently taps into any number of systems. We talked about this earlier. Like, how does it connect the apps on my phone, the email messages coming in, the, things that I'm watching and different streaming services, the things I'm doing in my day-to-day life, what I may have written down that it doesn't know about. Like, how could it possibly gather all of this information? Well, try of having spy software on your computer, which don't do that. That's bad. Um, you know, you would have to give it access to all of these things, right? That's a security feature, not a bug. We want to make sure that we can allow or revoke access. But in order for it to really do all of that, it would need to have access. Now, could it be programmed to say, well, if you told me to do this and I don't have access, I'm just going to hack and find a way? It could. Hopefully, you program it to not do that, right? This is where you start looking at what is it optimizing for. If you just say, make sure you do what you're told, like I feel like you're dealing with the wish spell or like the genie in the bottle of, be careful what you wish for because it could interpret that in some very unfortunate ways, and do some things that you really didn't intend. But as long as we can constrain the access in between kind of the AI and other applications and so forth, and keep some of that, I don't think we need to go into bringing everything together. As much as we talk about, for us, like if we're building a personal AI, we want all of our data together. Sure. But again, curated and secured. And so how do you make sure that you're securing it in a way that still prevents it from doing bad things, and you program it with enough safeguards that it's not going to try and circumvent those security measures to try and do whatever it is it's trying to do?
It makes me think of the Star Trek computer. It knows everything about
Yes.
everything. And I'd like a glass of wine. Well, it knows exactly which one I want, and that's what it creates. And I think about that. We are so tied into our ideas of personal ethics and privacy, and it's data is mine. Data about me is mine. I don't want it to
Mhm.
belong to someone else. But in order to live in that world where the computer can just meet your needs, we have to give everything up for that, and we have to be willing to trust that. Um, I feel like we're a long way away from that. I think we're not very far away from it looking like we're there. I
Mm,
think we're a long way away from exactly what you described, getting that AI governance layer of,
yeah.
what is allowed, what is not allowed, what is the bias, what bias are we going to allow, because there's always bias.
Hmm.
What guidelines are we expecting the AI to follow? What are those ethical considerations before we can get to a place where we truly could trust an AI who knows everything about us? I think we have to
Yeah.
really understand the in between governance components.
Well, and again, what are the things you want to reinforce versus bar? So a great example, let's go back to Star Trek, because I will always go back to Star Trek. The computer won't give you a glass of wine, it gives you a glass of wine flavored synthahol, because it's determined that alcohol is bad. So clearly it can't give you alcohol, even though you want wine. So it'll taste like wine, it'll look like wine, it'll smell like wine, but it won't be wine, it won't get you drunk. So because somebody somewhere said not allowed, right? Same thing with, there was a great episode where Deanna Troy asks for real chocolate and the computer says, I don't understand what you mean. She says, I want a real chocolate sundae with real chocolate ice cream and real fudge. Like, don't give me this low calorie, low fat, whatever, super healthy nonsense. I want real food. And it can't do it because it's not programmed to.
Because it goes outside of the guidelines of what someone has said is healthy
Correct.
for you. If I need to lose 10
Correct.
pounds and I'm trying to do that, then everything that would come out of that synthesizer is going to be low fat and low calorie, and probably
If
not
we
real.
get to a point, oh, if we get to a point where there are food dispensers like that and they're made of beetroot and kale, I'm done. Call it quits. I refuse. I will not support AI anymore.
We laugh and it seems ludicrous, but I don't think it's that far away, really.
It's not that far away. It really does depend on what you optimize for and what that means and what the current research is about that. Because think about what we thought was healthy 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago, and how much that has changed, right? Not that long ago, we were saying fat bad, terrible. Now it's sugar bad, terrible. You know, it changes. Some people say meat bad, terrible. It's, the understanding that we have changes our morality and changes what we see as good and bad for us, for people in general, for the planet, for everything. Again, we have to model for growth. If we encode the rules now and say this is forever, this is what's good and bad, that about that, it's not always been this way. Like, it will not always be this way. How do we ensure that there is still the opportunity for growth and learning? Well, I mean, it's a great example. For years, they thought that exogenous cholesterol was bad. Don't eat eggs if you have high cholesterol. Don't eat shellfish if you have high cholesterol. All these things. Then they're like, actually, exogenous cholesterol has nothing to do with your endogenous cholesterol, your cholesterol levels. It's all based on your genetics and your endogenous cholesterol. It doesn't matter what you eat. Go for it. Which I was very grateful for. But also, again, if we were saying, oh, well, I want an AI to create a meal plan for me every week so that I can eat healthily to what my body needs and based on all this, how does it continue to learn based on the latest research, and where is that research coming from and who's funding it and blah 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 blah. I'm not going to go into all that, but how does it know what's best for you right now based on the current understanding of how things work, how your body works, how food works, whatever's available?
Well, I know you didn't want to go there, but I am going to go there because I think the funding model matters. We build
Mhm.
what we are paid to build, and if we're paid to put something together by XYZ pharmaceutical company, and that research that they've done is what we utilize as what is quote true and what is quote good for you. That is a little bit of that's a lot of bias that we've been paid to build. And I've been
Mhm.
in healthcare data for 20 plus years, and we build things based off of the research. Well, the research changes over time, and yet it takes a
Mhm.
long time to build a system. And then the research has changed. And does anybody ever come back and say, oh, go back and change that? Here's a change request, modify the algorithms that are driving that system? No one ever does that, even though the research has changed. We employ a new product that brings in the new
Mhm.
research. So now we have the old stuff and then something to override it.
Yeah. So now you have tech debt that's just sitting there forever.
Mhm. Forever.
Yeah. Always great. And you probably have conflicting results. So do you trust the old system or do you trust the new system? Because both of them are there. You've not decommissioned the old one. And this is what happens. So then you go to ask the AI and it goes, well, I don't know. I've got two different answers.
Yeah.
Here's
Well, this
this
one's
answer and
been
here's this
queried.
answer. And then what's going to happen? We pick the one we like.
Well, and we talk about, this one's been queried 40,000 times and this one's been queried 200 times. Well, this one's 10
And
years
it's brand
old.
new.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
one's brand new. So yes, that's true, but that doesn't make it true. Or they're
Yes.
used to using this system. So, we employ
Hmm.
nurses to go in and exactly as you said and review it and make the decision based off of their knowledge and their critical thinking. But which one do they choose? I'm really
Hmm.
comfortable and familiar with this one. I'm not very tech savvy. This new thing is hard. And so it's
Yeah.
not where I'm going to get my information because it's not familiar and
Hmm.
comfortable and easy yet. And so, there's that whole organizational change and changing human
Yeah.
behavior that's also required as information changes and the technology that we use changes around that information.
Yeah, and so much of what I do these days is really helping my customers to transform and do organizational change management and look at how they can get people to adopt AI and to look for the new answers that are up to date and whatnot. But it's really challenging because the tendency to go towards, well, this is how we've always done it and we haven't had a problem, or this is how I've always done it because this is how I learned to do it when I was in school or when I first trained, and so I'm going to revert to that because that's what we've done for the last however long. But now there are new techniques, and again, to your point, it seems hard. And maybe I don't want to learn new techniques. It's the whole old dog new tricks. I'm only a couple years out from retirement and I don't want to learn a new technique. I can get by just fine on the things I've been doing this whole time. It happens, right? This is part of human nature. It's part of psychology. How do you get through that, right? How do you get past those types of resistances and get people to see that actually those things were problematic, not at the time because we didn't know better, but they would be problematic today. And that things have moved forward and that there's a reason for them to change with it.
I think the organizational design component of building out, well, really change management that doesn't ever really get funded, doesn't really ever get done well when you're implementing something. You basically build something, because I've done in data a long time, one foot in tech, one foot in business, and you build something, you hand it over and you say, here you go, you got 30 days warranty on that.
Yep.
Yeah, you didn't build in the changing the hearts, changing the minds, helping them. You did a 2-hour training so they know how to use the system. But do they know why to use the system? Do they know why it matters? Do they know why, how it impacts everything else in their program? Do they rewrite their policies? Do they rewrite their processes? All of those things
Mhm.
get ignored in our current funding models as we build things. I think that's been
Yeah.
true. I say current, but it's been true. I don't know, as long as I've been in the business. So I'm sure all the way back forever, because organizational design and change management being the critical piece of anything that we build or implement, especially AI, is going to be really important. I feel like it's, pivoting. I literally like looking at the 90-degree pivot of changing the way we think about things, changing the
Mhm.
questions we ask, changing the expectation of what answers we get back, and how we do the work that we do every day. It is absolutely based off of organizational design.
Absolutely. And the nice thing that we're seeing now with the focus that AI is getting, especially from, the executive suite, the C-suite, the board, et cetera, is that they see the opportunity for AI and they understand that it's going to take a lot of investment. Part of that investment is, of course, the technology, and that's what gets a lot of focus of how much is it going to cost to spin up AI? How much is a tokens going to cost if I'm running this on a third-party system? How much is this gonna cost from a time perspective for getting everything put in? But they also see that there's a change management program needed, and they are, for the most part, at least the companies that I've been talking to, they're aware that this is something that they need to fund. They need to support, they need to sponsor from an executive sponsorship perspective. They need to be quite active and vocal in addressing kind of that awareness campaign. If you look at something like AdCar of like, how do you get that original awareness? How do you start getting people to understand that this is a desirable change? And then how do you reinforce it as you continue to move forward so that as these systems are being updated in ways that will directly impact folks, they're aware, they want the change, they're able to kind of take on board new knowledge and information, they're able to reinforce that, and they're getting a feel for what's in it for them all along the way, right? So it's that kind of top down but also bottom up approach of being able to support the organizational change. And because there's such focus, we're really seeing management being the first folks to say, yes, this is what we want. But at the same time, we see that groundswell of people saying, I want to use AI. It seems like it could do some great things. You know, how do you meet in the middle? How do you create that link between the desire from management saying we want the results that it could drive, and the bottom tiers, the people on the front line saying we want to use this because we think it'd be really helpful for our role, to manifest that change and make sure that it's driven in the right way.
So one kind of last question, I guess, because we're really up on time, and I want to make sure we're
Yeah.
good with that. Along that line, the need to change, the organizational need to change, top down, bottom up. Um, Outside of, step outside of your current role, because I know you work for a company, and this is a big part of what you
Yeah.
do. Is it something that is best driven by the vendors and the people who bring this change to the organization? Or is it something that every organization should just simply have on staff, as a group of people who it's their job to make sure everything that goes into production, every new software, every new process or policy has organizational change associated with it?
I think it's a question of scale, right? When you have smaller organizations, there's not necessarily a specific role that's carved out that is the change manager. When you're in a smaller, like, startup organization, it's only a few folks. The amount of change you have to do is small, right? That everyone's bought in because they've probably all been contributing to whatever is about to change anyway. It's as you grow that becomes really problematic, and you have to start looking at how do you manage change across a broader, often disconnected group of people who are not necessarily as aware of the kind of broader ramifications of the changes that are being put in, and how they're expected to be part of that, and manifest that in their role. So I think as you get to bigger organizations, it is important to have change functions or transformation functions, however you want to put it, to really plan and orchestrate that change and ensure that they're bringing folks along that need to be brought along. Um, You can do it with external companies. It's not the vendors, like the tech vendors. I work for a tech vendor. It's not the tech vendors that are going to do that. It's more often the consultancies, frankly, that have the skill set to do that. That's not our function as a solution, a technology solution provider. We can tell you about all the other places where it's been done and all the partners that have helped our customers do it, but we're not going to do that for you. So I do think that's important. Where the vendors come in is in helping to provide the tools and the skill sets to use those tools directly for the folks who would actually be leveraging them, to ensure that you can adopt that quickly and start benefiting from the investments that you're making, at least in those first applications. There's still a change component though, because that just changes the techies, right? From our side, that's changing the folks who are directly touching the software applications that we're providing or the platform that we're providing. And then there's the rest, right? Everybody else still needs to get on board with the changes. And frankly, the things that we do are really in support of them. So it's the stuff we the data platform vendors change the technologists. The technologists still have to have that interface out to the business. To be able to say, this is the change, like this is how this needs to be implemented. This is how it was designed to work. And what we're seeing now, which I personally love, is that we're seeing a lot more engagement and interaction between the business and the data and AI side of saying, it's not just we're going to ship you some software, we're going to create a model. There is much more of a push from the customer and an involvement of the internal customer, like the business stakeholder, to say that this is what I need. This is what I'm trying to do. And I need you to understand the process so that you can help me to solve for this in a very different way than we've had before. There used to be very few people in those functions that could kind of translate, right, between the business and the tech side. And they were often very underappreciated. But we now see that that connection is really key, because that's the way that change really gets enabled, right? Because now they're saying, we want this, give me this, let me work with you to make sure it's what I want. And that's exactly what we need to have, right? That is immediate awareness and desire and knowledge of what's going on. Like change is just there. When you start to have that communication. The things that I'm often telling the folks that I work with, customers that I work with is, if you can do 3 things well, you'll nail it. It's communicate, collaborate, and iterate. If you can do that, you got it. You got change.
Communicate, collaborate, iterate. Those are 3 really good components that we should all be looking at, because you're right. If you can do that, you really can make the changes happen. Well, this has been a fascinating and very fun conversation, and I really appreciate you joining me today. Is there any last comment or thoughts that you'd like to leave everyone with, or are you open to having people reach out to you? What's your
Yeah.
thought?
Reach out to me. Lexi Kasson. I'm on LinkedIn, as I mentioned before. The other socials, really. You're welcome to reach out to me. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Lexi. Really appreciate it.